Hello and welcome to TV Dinners, a new series of programmes for World Bites. My name's Luke Gittos and I'm delighted to be presenting this first edition where we're looking at attempts to change our behaviour. We've got a team of intrepid World Bites volunteers here with us today. We also have Rob Lyons, who is our special guest this afternoon. He's Deputy Editor of Spiked Online and also author of Panic on a Plate, How Society Developed an Eating Disorder. While we sort of tuck into our food, here's a government advert and a Jamie Oliver classic for us to get our teeth into.
This is the amount of fat in that whole pizza. Yuck! There's 17 cubes of sugar in that fizzy drink.
Sloppy Joes. And then obviously going with those are our best friend here. French fries. What are these, guys? Tasty, tasty nachos. Who likes nachos?
Well, I remember Jamie Oliver coming to my school when I was in the final years, in a city sort of comprehensive school, and he was actually punched in the face by one of our students who clearly didn't like his ideas very much and quite enjoyed his turkey Twizzlers. But what do people think of the campaign?
I think it's very patronising to women in particular to say that you're not cooking anymore. Well, yeah, that's a great thing. We spent years trying to get women out of the kitchen, and now you want to put them back in?
Yeah, that's right.
I think the basic message is valid. It's just perhaps the way that they go about the things. So maybe the PR, the spin that they put on it is sensational. And doing that at the expense of missing the original point, which is actually trying to get people to eat healthier diets. So they're either beating people with a stick as opposed to tempting them with a carrot.
But do you think that's a legitimate thing for a government to be doing? To be promoting and actively trying to encourage people to eat healthy? Should that be the role of the government, or it should be something that we do amongst ourselves?
Absolutely, I think the government does have a duty to sort of educate people about different types of food and the impact of eating certain diets. But it's the way that they go about it that's what I take exception to.
Well, yeah, we have an NHS and we have, a limited amount of resources that we have to share out amongst everyone. If doctors think that we should be eating healthier so as to prevent a lot of spending on diseases as we get older and older, then yeah, maybe we do all have to cut back. Maybe the government does have to say something about it.
Well, I don't think it's the government's place to tell us, how to live our lives or what to eat. I mean, I think it's perfectly sensible for schools to teach children about the basics of nutrition, that you need protein and vitamins and minerals and that kind of thing. But to go further than that and say you should be eating this and you shouldn't be eating that is interfering in our choices a bit too far, really, I think. And as for the National Health Service, I mean, I think the idea of free healthcare when you need it is a good idea, but it's now become an excuse by which government is telling us what to do, so that it's like, well, if you don't do what we say you should be doing, you're going to bankrupt this free healthcare system. It's quite a big piece of blackmail, especially over something as popular as the National Health Service. It's like, the one thing that kind of unites the country is the National Health Service. So to say, you're holding a gun to the head of, our beloved NHS, that's why you've got to change your eating habits. I think that's the wrong way of going about things.
I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's something like 10% of government spending through the NHS is on diabetes, and that can come down if we all just eat healthier. And so if we can make a difference, why don't we?
I mean, if you accept on principle the idea that we should regulate and attempt to change people's lives in order to cut back on how much we have to spend on helping them, do you think that undermines the principle of the NHS, which is, well, the reason why the NHS is important is that it gives us the freedom to live however we want to, and that these new initiatives actually represent a change within the NHS? Because what's now being said is that in order to maintain the NHS, in order to propagate free healthcare for all, we're having to cut back on our freedom, which is really going against the very foundation of what the NHS was all about.
I don't think the NHS was about us doing whatever we want to do. I think the NHS was about giving to those who really, really needed it. And so if I, for example, can cut back on something now in order to increase the available amount of money in the pot for someone who actually really needs it because they have a genetic disorder or because, for one reason or another, then why shouldn't I?
The irony is, anybody who's smoking or drinking a lot or eating apparently the wrong foods, anything that actually does shorten their lives, you should go up to them, you should shake their hands and say thanks very much. Because what they're doing by living shorter lives is saving money for everybody else. Because everybody's going to get sick at some point, and the earlier in life we do it, the better in some ways. And if you're narrowly thinking about saving money, it's a horrible discussion to have, but if we live a long life, not only do we put off those healthcare costs till later, but also we need pensions, we need home helps, we need all sorts of different kinds of care in our old age. So the sooner we die, especially the sooner we die after we stop working, then from a purely fiscal point of view, that's the ideal thing. So it's a red herring, the whole argument about saving money for the NHS. It doesn't really work like that. I think that the principle of the government making these kind of micro choices for you is still a really, really bad one. Because I want to be able to make the choice myself about what I do. And I do have that choice. And there's so much food here, some of which is healthy, some of which is maybe not so healthy in those terms. And I've got the choice myself to decide what I'm going to put in my mouth.
Robert, don't you think it's some way, it's not a way of taxing those people who have the wrong behaviour somehow, even if it's his own choice?
It's interesting you use the word wrong behaviour. What do you think the wrong behaviour is?
Yeah. Well, you're right. You have a point actually, but everything is dangerous to a certain degree, and we can control the quantity and we can make the choice. But it is a fact that some people get overweight to a point where they actually struggle to do a lot of things like a normal person would do, and maybe they need assistance, they develop diseases. So those people who are more likely to actually go to the NHS for assistance, while active person exercising, eating healthier food will probably not. So it's like we all pay taxes at the same amount, but do we get the same in return?
But that argument is one of the ones I like the least about this whole discussion, because people who are overweight or smokers become demonised to the extent that we're almost saying, well, if you make these choices in your lifestyle, you shouldn't be entitled to the things that the rest of us are entitled to. Or if you get overweight or if you smoke, you're actually being selfish, because, God, how dare you use up all the valuable resources that us people who exercise all the time and eat 5 pieces of fruit and vegetables a day, you're using up those resources which could be used to keep us healthy people healthy when we get sick. So there's a real demonisation at the centre of the food discussion. And I just find that really deeply problematic.
For me, whenever I go to the doctor, they go, "Have you thought about your weight?" Actually, that becomes like it gets in the way of actually treating the patient in front of you. That you now have to look at them in terms of a set of targets. Are they too fat? What's their blood pressure like? And do they take enough exercise? Rather than actually treating whatever condition, which was probably almost certainly completely unrelated to any of those things.
Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. Then you create these kind of body issues and body images, like people suffering from dysmorphia, bulimia. In Belgium, they created this commercial for junk food, against junk food, and in the short commercial, it's really short, we've got 2 boys sitting in front of the computer. One is swallowing basically junk food, he's eating really bad food, and the other one is eating an apple. And basically, the one who's eating an apple is supposed to represent Steve Jobs. And the other guy who's eating the junk food is dreaming of his life, his life could have been if he had actually had this idea. And so he will have like the girl, the money, the glory, everything. And the voiceover is saying basically that if Jean-Claude would have been, eating healthier, he'll have everything, and basically it'll be Steve Jobs. So, I go back to
Is that the late Steve Jobs? The Steve Jobs that died quite young?
Yeah. So I go back to this idea that you're saying about demonizing obese people, fat people. They're not valuable enough. And it's kind of sad for a child to see that, because I've got a 10-year-old sister, and for her, she thinks that if you're fat, you're nothing.
I think that actually, further intervention with food can sometimes be even counterintuitive in a way, because I think the people, and as an individual, you lose that personal intuition for what you want to eat, and when it's associated with that guilt, you stop yourself eating certain things or whatever, and then that can you know, that whole yo-yo dieting thing comes along, and I think it's such a big factor in our society at the moment as well, and no one looks into that and says, oh wait, that's harmful.
Well, one of the ironies of this whole debate is the idea you shouldn't be obese and you should eat healthily, or you should go on a diet. But actually, diets are well known, well established, that they don't work in the long term. That people who go on diets, even if they lose quite a substantial amount of weight, do within, whether it's 6 months or 4 years or whatever, they bounce back to their original weight and actually very often put on more weight than they started with. So the idea that there's a simple cure for obesity is just not true. And also, I mean, looking around this room, the vast majority of us, perhaps me as the exception, couldn't get really fat even if we tried. So there's a very big genetic component to these things. Some people are very susceptible to piling on the pounds.
The way that the health professionals are told that they have to measure what it actually is obesity, and obviously they do that through the BMI, but there's known to be quite a few flaws with the measurement of how you actually judge that. It doesn't mean that if someone's just overweight or in an obese category that they're necessarily going to suffer later on in life with problems to do with their health. They may be healthy, but they may just be overweight. I think there's a blurring and a line with the health professionals of what they're told to do, how to measure obesity is also sort of a problem as well.
We hear a lot about the obesity and epidemic of obesity. Do you buy into that idea?
Well, no, because for a variety of reasons. One is the idea that it's kind of a death sentence, which I really don't believe. If you look at the kind of life expectancies amongst people who are in the so-called normal weight category, the overweight category, the obese category, and actually from a whole range from skinny really right through to someone like me who's a bit fat, there's very little difference in life expectancy. And actually the American research on this suggests that actually it's people in the overweight category who seem to have the longest life expectancy. And also the idea that there's this time bomb that's about to go off, and actually this epidemic is going to just take off and everybody's going to get fatter and fatter and fatter. It's just not borne out by the statistics, because actually in the countries that had obesity for a while, like an obesity problem, they're plateauing. So in Britain, for example, we've had about 25% rate of obesity for about 10 years now. It hasn't really gone up at all. Amongst children, if anything, it's gone down slightly. So the idea that if we don't do something soon, half the population is going to be waddling around or having to kind of have electric scooters or something is just completely not true. I mean, basically the number of people who really struggle with their weight and have a really serious problem is probably a couple of % of the population.
Do you think there's also a class-based issue on how these things are done? Because a lot of the advertising against unhealthy food, they target things like McDonald's, they target cheap, crappy fast food. Whereas, you can eat a Jamie Oliver's cake and get fat. Don't you think that there's also a way that this is done that kind of separates rich and poor and demonizes the poor?
Yeah, well, I mean, it looks like Jamie's been dodging the sun a little bit lately himself. But so yeah, absolutely. I think the idea that cheap food is somehow necessarily more fattening than more expensive food is completely wrong. It obviously has something to do with the actual content of the food combined with your genetics and how you react to it. There isn't a great distinction between the less well-off and the richest. That's not the impression you would get from the way it's covered. It's like the government's going out to kind of do missionary work on us dumb, uneducated people going to Tesco. We should realise that if we only made the right choices, which should obviously be from Waitrose, then we'd be better off. And actually, people are much less in terms of obesity rates.
I'm from Italy, and we actually talk a lot about youngers being too skinny, because that's probably a more serious problem than being too fat.
Yeah.
So why is that? Why fat had become, in these days, bad, while back in the days used to be, rich people were actually fat, and the one who couldn't afford to eat were like skinny and starving.
It does worry me about the pressure on young women not eat. So I mean, they talk about kids not going to school dinners, but like when they're 14, 15, 16-year-olds, I suspect the boys are going down to the chip shop and the young girls are, eating a single diet bar or something, and are under constant pressure from each other to stay super skinny, and often very miserable as a result of that. So in other countries there's a much healthier attitude towards being heavy, and they're much more relaxed to it. I mean, so I live in Peckham, and there's this big West African sort of community in Peckham, and there you can see that, like, from their point of view, they're completely relaxing. In fact, they like the big girls, you know. So it's they're completely chilled out about the whole thing. And I think it's a much healthier attitude to have than being constantly worried about, you know, the next, you know, stick of celery that you're eating.
We all know that at WorldwRite we eat the finest quality fare, but there's been a lot in the news recently about meat being labelled as beef when in fact it's horse meat. So surely that's not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing in one respect, is that it's fraud, and the people, you know, I want to know what's inside the box is what's written on the outside of the box. So I think that that's fair enough to be critical of that. But actually, apart from that, this is the weirdest, you know, sort of scare story of all time. It's actually somebody in the Financial Times made this point that it's maybe unique in that, you know, somebody's put adulterated food by adding something to it that's better than the thing that it's replacing. Because, you know, horse meat's fine, and plenty of people in Europe eat it all the time. But what does worry me is that it's being used to demonise people about cheap food again, and the idea that, well, actually you kind of deserve it. You know, if you're going to eat a Findus lasagna, then you kind of deserve whatever you get. As it happens this time, it's not that bad, but, you know, and I think that's a real problem. Or they demonise the idea that having big food, having supermarkets or having processed food, which I think actually most people would recognise has been very, very useful, giving us more choices, cheapening food. I would hate if we ended up, as a result of the horse meat scandal, with more regulation and actually less choice because we're being forced to buy from, you know, Farmer Giles down the road now, rather than being able to enjoy the fruits of the world market, or at least the European market. I think there's a lot of danger in getting overreacting to this stuff.
Well, we're not eating horse today, no matter how nice it is.
And actually, just tie into a broader environment in which, because I think politicians have real struggle, you know, justifying themselves these days, there is a real tendency to think, well, we can't control the economy, we can't control anything else, but we can protect you from yourself. So whether it's food or smoking or drinking or whatever other habits you may have, that's a big idea now at the moment, whether it's nudging us or shoving us or banning us or regulating us in one way or another. The idea is that we need to be protected from ourselves, or we need to be protected from evil big food companies or whatever. And I think that we actually need to assert a sense of ourselves, of our own autonomy, and about our right to make some, you know, the choices, whether they're good choices or bad choices in somebody else's eyes. And if we do that, I think that's going to make for a much healthier society in the political sense.
Well, that's all we've got time for on this edition of TV Dinners. I'd like to thank our intrepid volunteers for being with us, and our special guest, Rob Lyons. Please do join in the discussion in the comment section, and if you'd like to join us at the dinner table, please do get in contact via email. And cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's sugary, unhealthy nonsense. That's what you want to avoid, mate.
I'll be the one to get happy.
Yeah, exactly.